David Fincher is one of the most unique, respected, and famous directors in Hollywood. If you don't know his name, you've certainly heard of his work. Alien 3, Seven, The Game, Fight Club, Panic Room, Zodiac, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, The Social Network, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and Gone Girl have all been seen as some of the best films of their respective years. Except for Alien 3, that wasn't very good. But even Fincher thinks so. I mean, he had no creative control on that movie, so the less said about Alien 3, the better. He has also worked in TV, and I will be looking at both his TV series, House of Cards and Mindhunter, throughout this video, but the purpose of the video is to find out what is it that makes a David Fincher film a David Fincher film. But before I do any of that, I think it's best to give you some history on the guy outside of his films and his filmmaking, because it does come into play later on in the video. Fincher knew from a young age that he wanted to be a filmmaker, directing plays and designing sets and lighting at school. It was pretty clear that he was very talented, and that talent landed him a job at Corti Films as production head. He then moved up the ranks to become a visual effects producer. Now pay attention to this bit and remember this bit, because this is the important bit. He was then hired by Industrial Light and Magic, also known as ILM, as an assistant cameraman. He worked on Return of the Jedi and The Temple of Doom. He then went on to direct commercials, the most famous one being the Smoking Baby commercial he made for the American Cancer Society. This gained him a lot of attention from producers in LA and got him the opportunity to direct commercials for big brands like Nike, Levi's, and Coke. Music videos were the next thing for Fincher. He's made a total of 60 with Madonna being a frequent collaborator. His most recent music video was Suit and Tie for Justin Timberlake. After a few hit videos, he co-founded Propaganda Films and continued to direct music videos and commercials. Directors like Michael Bay, Zack Snyder, Spike Jonze, Anton Fuqua, Michel Gondry, and Gore Verbinski all worked at Propaganda before moving on to making feature films. Now that that's out the way, let's look into his filmmaking techniques, because these really are what define his films, starting off with his use of the camera. Fincher's movement of the camera is insanely subtle, precise to the point where most people don't realize the camera is moving. In many cases, the camera will move or stop moving exactly in time with the character it is following. It will move with even the most insignificant things, like someone standing up from a chair. This level of detail is one of the things that sets Fincher apart from other directors. This also means that the audience will subconsciously notice every movement that a character makes, and will then have a better understanding of their behavior, and in turn will be more immersed and invested in the characters because they feel like they are moving with the characters. Because the camera movements exactly match the movements of the character, you feel as if you are following their every move. You see what they see, you hear what they hear, and so a connection is created between you and the character without knowing. Which brings me to Fincher's cinematic perspective. The idea that he makes you feel like you are the character only applies to some of his films, as his perspective is constantly changing from movie to movie. For example, films like Seven, The Game, and Panic Room all feel very in the moment. You are always with the characters, learning new information alongside them as the story progresses. This is very similar to the cinematic perspective of director Christopher Nolan, who once said that if he was making a movie in which his characters were in a maze, he wants the audience to be down in the maze with the characters as opposed to looking down on them from above. However, films like Fight Club, The Social Network, and Gone Girl work slightly differently. Both Fight Club and The Social Network have a non-linear story structure, which means that it could start at the end and flash back to the beginning, or in The Social Network's case, go back and forth from present day to the past. This makes the audience more aware of a certain situation than the character, because they have already been told or shown what is going to happen. The same applies to Gone Girl, as the audience knows more than Ben Affleck's character does. We already know that Amy is a psychopath who planned her own disappearance just as the mystery begins to unravel for Nick. The use of voiceover in these films also distances the audience from the movie, essentially reminding us that we are watching a movie. This is taken to the next level in House of Cards, as Frank Underwood occasionally breaks the fourth wall and talks directly to the camera. So the perspective in Fincher's films is never fixed, it's always changing to suit the needs of the story. Back to the camera work. We live in a world where filmmakers love moving the camera, whether it's a smooth and steady tracking shot or completely handheld fight scenes. Many directors like to give off the idea that there is a person, a human being behind the camera. Fincher, on the other hand, does not. In his films, the camera is almost always locked down using a slider or some form of stabilization, taking away from the fact that there is a human operating the camera. He says that he likes the camera to feel omniscient and lack personality, as he believes that more stylized shots can take you out of the experience. This level of precision in the camera movement, however, does require a ton of practice, both with the camera operator and the actor. This is one of the reasons he is infamous for having so many takes, but more on that later. Two shots are used quite often in Fincher's films. Here is an example of a two-shot, here's another example of a two-shot, 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 two-shot. Two shots are used most frequently in conversation scenes to show a connection or lack thereof between characters. It could be used to show certain characters forming a connection for the first time. A scene could start with a two-shot, then change to the standard shot reverse shot style to show the breaking of said connection. Fincher rarely uses close-ups, so it's clear that something important is happening when he does use a close-up, as he's trying to tell the audience to pay attention to this thing. This can also be used to trick the audience, as he will sometimes close up on something completely irrelevant to fool the audience into believing that it is significant to the story even though it is not. This is most evident in The Game, which is fair enough because the game is a mystery. He loves using wide shots, which are commonly used to show the size and magnitude of something, or to create a sense of isolation, or to give the audience a breath of fresh air after a high intensity scene, and also because they can look really good. But at the end of the day, everything in Fincher's films is in service of the story. He rarely uses handheld shots, which, like I said earlier, is very popular amongst modern filmmakers. In films like Seven, which has the most handheld shots out of all of his films, handheld shots are used to create a sense of panic and uncertainty. In the desert scene at the end, Brad Pitt's character is filmed using handheld, whereas Kevin Spacey's character is filmed using stationary and low-angle shots to show his intellectual dominance. He's cool, calm, collected, whereas Pitt's character is in a state of pure panic. This is all reflected in the camera work. The chase scene also uses handheld. Other examples include the final shots from the first season of Mindhunter, when protagonist Holden Ford comes to a dark realization that he may be a sociopath. There are also a couple of handheld shots in Girl with Dragon Tattoo and Gone Girl to heighten the sense of discomfort within a character or to highlight the intensity of a certain moment. He also uses crane shots, but rarely though. These are done to purposefully stand out, especially in this scene from Gone Girl, as an effort to over-dramatize the scene and make it feel fake and out of place, as for Amy, the whole thing is an act. Through his use of the camera, Fincher makes it so clear that he is a master at different camera techniques, but the important thing is to know when to use what. The next thing I want to touch on is his visual style, the way he lights a scene, the colors he uses, and what they might mean. Directors like Quentin Tarantino, Nicholas Winding Refn, and Wes Anderson are all great examples of filmmakers who make colourful films. Fincher is not one of them. Although his films look incredible, Zodiac being his most colourful film in my opinion, colourful is not a word one would use to describe them. The two main colours he uses in pretty much all of his films are yellow and blue. Here are some examples. This could be because it simply looks nice, but in classic Fincher form, everything has a purpose. He knows that no matter how good a film looks or sounds, it is nowhere near as important as the story or the characters. His films contain both substance and style, but he also knows which is more important than the other. His use of a very cold and almost electric colour palette in films such as Gone Girl and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo are for a purpose of showing the dark and cold world in which the movies take place, which is why the flashback scenes in both films are shot using very warm colours to suggest that there has been a change in the characters. So I guess you could say that just like his camera work, his use of colours is very subtle until it isn't. He also seems to dislike scenes that take place in broad daylight, which is fair enough because scenes that take place in broad daylight can look rather flat. Any scene from his work which takes place in the sun and should look sunny doesn't. Any and all light in that scene feels muted and desaturated. This again could be done to show the darkness of the story. In House of Cards, Panic Room, Zodiac and anything else he does, the lack of proper sunlight could be done to create an eerie sense of unease, to make the audience feel as if something isn't right. Moving on to sound, the one thing most people tend to notice regarding sound in his work is that it is very realistic. Scenes in The Social Network, which take place in a crowded area, sound very realistic as the dialogue between the characters is competing with all the background noise, therefore the audience must focus more on what the characters are saying, and without knowing they are paying more attention to the film. This is genius, by the way. This level of realism is taken to the next level in Mindhunter when subtitles are utilised as Holden is talking to his girlfriend while a band is playing in the background. I think I've made it pretty clear just how far he's willing to go in order to create a film or an episode of television that is as realistic as the story needs it to be. Far and away the thing that sets Fincher apart from other great filmmakers is his mastery of incorporating visual effects into his films. Remember when I said earlier that his work at ILM would come into play? Well, it's now. His use of CGI or computer-generated imagery makes his filmmaking style almost the complete opposite to that of directors like the aforementioned Christopher Nolan, Guillermo del Toro, and Steven Spielberg. These guys go out of their way to use as many practical effects as possible. Fincher, on the other hand, goes out of his way to make principal photography as easy and hassle-free as possible, so that he can shoot many takes, again more on this later, and that means using a lot of CGI. To really illustrate my point, the corridor fight scene from Nolan's Inception was done for real. They had to build a proper set that rotated and work out exactly when to move the camera. The actors also had to learn the choreography and perform it exactly as planned, otherwise it could have been dangerous. Now let's look at a scene from Fincher. The opening murder from Zodiac was shot on a soundstage. Nick and Amy's house in Gone Girl is also a set with green screens outside, not a real house. This gap in Rooney Mara's hair here is CG. In fact, all the blood in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is CG. That's right, no fake blood was used whatsoever, it was all computer generated. The snowy weather was also added in post-production, so they didn't have to use loud snow machines or wait for it to snow, which basically meant that they could film the scene whenever they want and for as many times as they want. Again, more on the many takes later. CGI is also blended with practical when filming action scenes such as this car chase in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, in order to have a more controlled environment and make it safer for the actors. Going back to Zodiac, almost all the background shots are green or blue screen, as Fincher wanted to create the most realistic depiction of the 70s and 80s, and the use of CGI was the best way to create an accurate representation of that era. Certain long take establishing shots in Fight Club and Panic Room are also CGI, as Fincher believed that a long, uninterrupted shot was easier to follow, and gave the audience a better idea of what and where everything was in the scene than a bunch of separate shots edited together. Essentially, he's using computer technology to acquire shots that humans are physically incapable of getting in order to create a more immersive environment. By far, the most impressive use of CGI in Fincher's films, however, are without a doubt Benjamin Button and The Social Network. For Benjamin Button, Brad Pitt's performance and facial expressions were captured on a sound stage with 4 HD cameras and image analysis technology, and then that performance would be put in the place of the physical actor's face. Pitt wasn't physically in the movie until the 52-minute mark, where he says this line, Captain Mike. That's when the real Brad Pitt takes over. A similar process is applied to the Winklevoss twins in The Social Network, in which Josh Pence's face was replaced with Armie Hammer, who in the movie seems to play both characters, even though him and Pence got a chance to play both characters, as they were constantly swapping around, which means that even though they were side characters, their workload was probably on the same level as Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield's. In the hands of a lesser filmmaker, the Winklevi could easily have been fraternal twins, with Pence and Hammer playing one each, but Fincher knew that the technology was there, and so he took that opportunity to pioneer one of the most impressive visual effects in movie history that is very, very popular in films nowadays. When it comes to collaborations, he likes to work with the same group of people, such as editor Angus Wall, cinematographer Jeff Cronenweth, and composers Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. The same applies to actors. Brad Pitt, Rooney Mara, and Jared Leto have all done at least 2 films with him. Kevin Spacey and Robin Wright have both done 1 movie and 1 series, and Holt McCallany has done 2 films and 1 series, Mindhunter. Despite working with a lot of the same actors, Fincher has worked with many of Hollywood's other big stars, many of which have gained a lot of recognition from working with him. I think the reason Fincher likes to work with the same people, especially actors, is because they are able to tolerate his extreme filming style. As I mentioned briefly throughout the video, he is infamous for filming an incredibly large number of takes for even the smallest scenes. This particular scene from Gone Girl, when Ben Affleck is chased into a police car, took over 20 takes with over 100 people as extras. His shooting ratio is insane. On average, a 90-minute movie would have the shooting ratio of about 10:1, which means that 10 hours of raw footage for 1 hour of actual film footage. Gone Girls is 200:1, which means 500 hours of raw footage for a 149-minute movie. To further put this into perspective, Mad Max Fury Road had a shooting ratio of 240:1, but that film was action scene after action scene after action scene after action scene, so it makes sense. This is what Fincher had to say about his excessive shooting style.
My philosophy is you spend $250,000 on a set. You're going to put it on a soundstage, it costs you $5,000 a day. You're going to put $8,000 worth of lights you're going to bring a $150,000 crew in. You're going to bring actors in from all over the world. You're going to put them up in hotels. They're going to come there, and the idea is to get them out as soon as possible. Who wants to live like that? If I fly you in from Iceland and you're supposed to do one day, I want to make sure that we get it.
I think it's clear that he likes everything to feel real, even if it's at the cost of his stars, as this of course is a very tiring and frustrating process, but most actors who work with him tend to enjoy this process as they are allowed to do different things with the character and they're not pressured by time or the idea that they need to get it right as soon as possible because everyone is waiting for them. He has also been known to physically exert his actors as well. He told Edward Norton to punch Brad Pitt in the ear instead of the face as planned in order to achieve a genuine reaction.
Mother hit me in the ear.
So I think that it is fair to say that although the reasoning for his method of filmmaking does make sense, he does sometimes take it a little bit far. To conclude, I think that David Fincher is a director who isn't afraid to do things differently, to explore and experiment with up-and-coming technology, and to tell stories that aren't bogged down by a linear 3-act structure. His work isn't held down by traditional cliches, and his characters cannot be put under any stereotypes. Although his films may look and sound quite familiar, the substance is almost always different. Except for serial killers, he loves serial killers. In a world littered with superhero movies, sequels, remakes, and adaptations, ranging from absolute masterpieces to simply horrible, there are only a handful of great original films and TV series per year, and it takes someone like Fincher to make something truly different, daring, and memorable.